The Republican Party is currently trying to convince average Americans that tax cuts for the wealthy is actually in our best interest because at the end of the day, rich people will be so touched by the Republican Party's generosity that they'll be encouraged to invest in the U.S. economy, create jobs, and even possibly raise their employees' wages as a direct result of these tax cuts. Now, unfortunately for the Republican Party, a plurality of Americans aren't buying into their bullshit because a Reuters Ipsos poll actually found that 49% of Americans oppose the Republican Party's plan to reform the U.S. tax system and only 29% of the country support it. But I mean, still, for a bill that actually raises taxes on the lower and middle classes in order to pay for tax cuts for the rich, 29% is still way too high of a number. For 1/3 of Americans to still buy into this idea that trickle-down economics is going to work when it's failed multiple times, it's mind-boggling to me. But this is what's going to happen because we've seen the way that this story plays out before and we have spoilers. They're going to raise the deficit as a result of these tax cuts, and then they're going to propose a solution to the problem that they've created. And of course, that solution will be to cut Medicare, Medicaid, and Social Security. Now, Republicans rarely admit this explicitly, except recently, Marco Rubio surprisingly did admit that this is the party's intentions. In fact, he said the way that you address the federal deficit is, quote, we have to do two things. We have to generate economic growth, which generates revenue, while reducing spending. That will mean instituting structural changes to Social Security and Medicare for the future. So by saying that he wants to reduce spending by instituting structural changes to Social Security and Medicare for the future, it might not sound like he's explicitly saying that he wants to cut Social Security, but that's exactly what he's saying. Now, on the Senate floor, Bernie Sanders actually asked him about this admission, and of course, since he was put on the spot, he decided to lie.
I see Senator Rubio down here as well. He just the other day, correct me if I'm wrong, Senator Rubio, I know you just walked in it, I've got you into this debate, but correct me if I am wrong if you did not say yesterday that the Senate would now proceed to a quote-unquote entitlement reform, which in fact will mean cuts to Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid. And I would yield to my friend from Florida to tell me whether or not I am accurately portraying what he said just the other day.
Mr. President.
The Senator for Florida.
Mr. President, it would surprise my friend to know that in Florida we got a lot of people on Medicare and Social Security. One of them is my mother. If I were to cut her Medicare and Social Security, sir, I probably could never see her again or go home. So the answer to your question is no. As I've been clear time and again, I believe that for future generations like myself, there need to be adjustments made. All right.
Let me quote you. Let me quote you, Senator Rubio. Tell me if this quote is right. This was a quote that you just made yesterday. And if I'm wrong, I apologize. But as I understand it, you spoke to a group of Wall Street lobbyists, and this is what you said, quote, many argue that you can't cut taxes because it will drive up the deficit. But we have to do two things. We have to generate economic growth, which generates revenue, while reducing spending. That will mean instituting structural changes to Social Security and Medicare for the future, end of quote. Now, let me help define what my Republican colleagues mean when they talk about structural changes to Social Security and Medicare. It will mean that at a time when senior citizens are splitting their pills in half, Republicans will go forward with massive cuts to Medicare. Now, maybe their idea will be to raise the retirement age to 70, forcing older workers in terms of Social Security to work more before they can get their benefits. Maybe it will be privatizing Medicare and giving people a voucher. When my Republican friends talk about saving Social Security and Medicare, what they are talking about is cutting it.
Are you not convinced, Bernie? I mean, why would Marco Rubio want to cut Social Security when his mom is on Social Security? And she would clearly be outraged at the fact that her own son voted to cut a program that she benefits from. Well, when masters of doublespeak like Marco Rubio talk about cutting programs like Social Security, you have to realize that they're not actually saying that they want to cut Social Security for the people currently benefiting from it right now, because of course, a lot of their constituents are older and they do rely on programs like Social Security and Medicare. But what he is saying is that he wants to cut Social Security for future generations. And that's why it's really important to listen to every single word that Republicans use, specifically when they talk about Social Security, because usually they have a couple of catchphrases that let us know exactly what they're doing. So when they talk about reforming Social Security, that always means cuts. When they talk about making sure it lasts for future generations, that usually means raising the retirement age and paying out less benefits, so that way people my age, when we actually are old enough to retire, we won't be able to even rely on Social Security. Now, you don't actually even have to take my word for it, because Bernie Sanders actually got one of his colleagues in the Senate to admit to this very fact, that he is talking about Social Security, but cutting it for future generations. So watch this exchange between Bernie Sanders and Pat Toomey, and it is incredibly illuminating and sheds a lot of light on the Republican Party's hidden agenda.
Are you guaranteeing the American people that you will not be cutting Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid? Don't use the word save, because what save means is a cut. Will you guarantee the American people now there will be zero cuts to benefits in Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid? That you're not, excuse me, it's my time. I will yield to you. I will yield to you, but let me finish. I yielded to you before. Will you guarantee the people of this country that after this bill passes, you will not come back, raise the retirement age, voucherize Medicare, raise the retirement age to Medicare, cut cost of living increases by instituting a so-called chained CPI? Do I have your word on that?
So I have to disappoint the senator from Vermont by informing him that there is no secret plan to do any of the above. We are not in some process to spring something. If we wanted to make these changes in Medicare and Medicaid, this would be the vehicle, because we have reconciliation protection to do it.
You know, let me just be very clear. I'm happy to hear this. Do I have your word now that you, as a senator, I know you can't speak for everybody, that you, as a senator, after this bill is passed, and I suspect it will be, you will not support any cuts to Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid? Do I have that word from you?
I am not going to support any cuts to people who are on the program and need those benefits.
There it is.
But I want this program to survive. I'm going to acknowledge that we need this program for the next generation, too.
He just let the cat out of the box, or whatever the phrase is. He just told you he's going to cut Social Security. That's it, my friends. He will not cut it. What he just said, he will not cut it for people who are on Social Security right now. I hear that. But if you are 50 years of age, or you are 55 years of age, they just told you, my friend from Pennsylvania just told you, they may go forward to raise the retirement age, they may cut your cost of living adjustment. That is what he just said. So there is a plan, and that is exactly what they intend to do. And that's why I hope that we can get strong support for this amendment that will require a 2/3 vote to prevent any cuts to Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid. And with that, Mr. President, I would yield.
That is how you play politics. And make no mistake about it, if every single Democrat held Republicans' feet to the fire to this extent, then they wouldn't be able to get away with half the shit that they are able to actually get away with. So, of course, what Pat Toomey admitted there, as Bernie Sanders explained, is that the way that they're going to respond to this deficit crisis that they're creating is by cutting Medicare, Medicaid, and Social Security. Now, again, it's very rare that you'll actually find a Republican outright say that we should privatize Social Security or outright cut Social Security, but that's exactly what they want to do. And it's why when you catch wind of these behind-the-door speeches that they have with Wall Street executives, that's what they're talking about. I mean, Wall Street has been salivating over Social Security for decades. They've been wanting to privatize it for a really long time. They've been wanting to dip into the cookie jar that is Medicare and Medicaid. The problem is that there's so much public support for these programs that cutting it would be highly unpopular, which is why Republicans have to lie and resort to speaking in misleading terms in order to deceive the American people and reduce the chance that they'll catch wind of the party's real agenda. So what the Republican Party is doing is they are cutting taxes of the wealthiest Americans in the country, and ultimately, we're all going to get screwed over in the process. I mean, to cut the taxes of people who already have more money than they could spend in 10 lifetimes, let alone one, that's egregious enough in and of itself. But when you factor in the fact that Republicans actually want to screw us over and rob money from us in order to pay for tax cuts to their donors, I mean, it's just absolutely absurd. This party is shameless in the way in which they just have completely sold out to the interests of the rich and large multinational corporations. They don't give a damn about you and I, but somehow they still manage to win elections. Well, that would stop if more Democrats did what Bernie Sanders did here. You have to emulate what Bernie Sanders is doing. You have to use their own words against them and dissect every single word that they use when they talk about Social Security, because it is apparent that they want to cut Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid, but you actually have to be an astute political observer to catch that this is what they want to do in their rhetoric, because, again, they speak in veiled terms. So the Republican Party, I mean, I don't have to tell you that this party is a joke. To even call them a party would grant them legitimacy that they don't deserve. This isn't a party. This is just a conglomerate of corporate sellouts that are elected to do one thing, and that is to give tax cuts to their donors and screw over the working people in this country. It is absolutely sickening.
Support this podcast by becoming a patron at patreon.com/Humanist Report.